The smell of decay hung in the air outside the bakery in Buffalo, Wyoming, and Florence Pritchard pressed her thin fingers against the shop window, watching the woman inside arrange fresh loaves that might as well have been made of gold. Her stomach cramped with such violence that she had to steady herself against the wooden frame, leaving a smudge on glass that probably cost more than everything she currently owned. It was September 1876, and the summer had been merciless, taking her husband Thomas 3 months back to a fever that started in his lungs and ended with him buried in the hard earth outside their failing homestead. She had not eaten a proper meal in 6 days. The jerky she had been rationing ran out yesterday morning, and the vegetable garden she had tried so desperately to maintain through the drought had yielded nothing but withered stalks and broken promises. Her wedding ring caught the afternoon light, the simple gold band Thomas had placed on her finger 4 years ago when she was 19, and stupid enough to believe love could conquer the harsh realities of frontier life. She twisted it slowly, feeling how loose it had become on her finger, weight loss making even her jewelry ill-fitting. The baker, a stern-faced woman named Mrs. Henderson, glanced up, and their eyes met through the window. Florence saw the recognition there, followed by something that might have been pity or might have been contempt. She could not tell any more. The distinction between those two emotions had blurred considerably since Thomas died and left her alone on 80 acres of stubborn land that refused to yield anything useful. Florence pulled open the door, and the smell of fresh bread nearly brought tears to her eyes. Her mouth watered so intensely it hurt. "I need bread," she said, her voice coming out rougher than intended. "Please." Mrs. Henderson wiped flour from her hands onto her apron, her expression unchanging. "You got money, I have this." Florence pulled the ring from her finger. The metal felt warm from her skin, and for a moment she could not make herself extend her hand to show it. This was the last piece of Thomas she had, the last physical reminder that someone had once loved her enough to promise forever. But forever had turned out to be considerably shorter than either of them anticipated, and the dead did not need symbols while the living needed sustenance. The baker took the ring, held it up to the light, and bit it gently. "Gold. Not much of it, but it is real enough. I will give you 2 loaves." "White bread day old, 3 loaves," Florence countered, "and some of that cheese I see on the counter. The ring is not worth that much. It is worth considerably more, and you know it." Florence straightened her spine despite the weakness in her legs. 3 loaves, the cheese, and a small portion of that salt pork. Mrs. Henderson studied her for a long moment, and Florence refused to look away. Finally, the baker nodded. "Fine, but only because I knew your husband. He was a decent man, he was." Florence watched as Mrs. Henderson gathered the items, wrapping them in brown paper with efficient movements. When the package was pressed into her hands, she felt the weight of it and wanted to weep with relief. Instead, she nodded her thanks and walked back into the harsh sunlight. She made it 2 blocks before her hands started shaking so badly she had to sit down on the wooden walkway. She tore into the paper and broke off a piece of bread, forcing herself to eat slowly even though every instinct screamed at her to devour it all at once. The bread was dry and tough, but it was the most delicious thing she had ever tasted. She closed her eyes and chewed carefully, feeling strength beginning to seep back into her limbs. "You all right, miss?" Florence opened her eyes to find a man standing over her, his shadow providing momentary relief from the sun. He was tall, dressed in dusty traveling clothes with a gun belt slung low on his hips. His face was weather-beaten but kind, with dark eyes that held genuine concern. He looked to be in his late 20s, maybe 30 at most, with brown hair that needed cutting and a few days' worth of stubble on his jaw. "I am fine," she said, though they both knew it was a lie. He crouched down so he was at her level, his knees cracking slightly with the movement. You do not look fine. You look half-starved and about ready to fall over. Then I suppose appearances are accurate. She took another small bite of bread. I appreciate your concern, but I can manage. I am sure you can. He did not move. My name is Matthew Sullivan. I just rode into town about an hour ago looking for work. Ranch hand, cattle driver, pretty much anything that pays. Florence Pritchard. She saw no reason not to give her name. And I am afraid I cannot help you with employment. I can barely help myself. Matthew nodded slowly, his eyes taking in her worn dress, her thin frame, the desperate way she clutched the paper-wrapped food. Your husband around, dead, 3 months now. The words still felt strange in her mouth, too blunt and final. I am sorry. And he sounded like he meant it, which somehow made it worse. Any family, back in Ohio. We left 5 years ago to make our fortune out west. She laughed, the sound bitter. That worked out splendidly, as you can see. You have land. 80 acres about 6 miles south of here. Not that it is worth much. The soil is poor and I have no money for proper seed or equipment. I have been trying to figure out what to do with it, but mostly I have been trying not to starve. Matthew was quiet for a moment, and she could see him thinking, working through something in his mind. I have a proposition for you. I am not interested in that kind of proposition. Florence started to stand, but he held up his hands. Not that. Jesus, no, I meant a business proposition. He waited until she settled back down. You have land but no help. I have skills and a strong back but no land. What if I worked your property, got it productive again? We could split whatever profit comes from it. You would have income and I would have a place to stay and work. Florence stared at him. You want to work my land for half the profits when you could hire on at any of the ranches around here for guaranteed wages. The ranches are not hiring. I already checked. Cattle market is down and everyone is cutting back. He shrugged. Besides, I am tired of working for other men. I want something of my own, even if it is just half of something. And you need help. That much is obvious. It was a ridiculous offer. She knew nothing about this man except his name and that he was apparently unemployed. He could be a thief, a murderer, or simply incompetent at the work he claimed to be able to do. But she was also realistic enough to know her options were severely limited. She could try to sell the land, but she would get almost nothing for it in its current condition. She could stay in town and look for work, but jobs for women were scarce and usually involved either cleaning or working in the saloon, neither of which appealed to her. Or she could accept this stranger's help and maybe, possibly, have a chance at making the homestead work. I cannot pay you anything beyond room and board until we actually make some money, she said. I understand. And you sleep in the barn. I will not have talk. Fair enough. And if you try anything inappropriate, I have a shotgun and I know how to use it. A slight smile tugged at the corner of his mouth. I believe you. Florence took a deep breath, wondering if she was making a terrible mistake. All right then. We can try it, but I warn you the place is in rough shape. My husband built the cabin, but he was better with ideas than execution, and since he died I have barely been able to keep up with basic maintenance. I have worked with worse. Matthew stood and offered her his hand. She took it, letting him pull her to her feet. His grip was strong and calloused, the hand of someone who actually did physical labor for a living. When can we start? I have a wagon at the livery. We can head out now if you want. I only came to town to. She trailed off, not wanting to admit she had just sold her wedding ring for food. But Matthew's eyes had dropped to her left hand, to the pale band of skin where the ring had been, and she saw understanding dawn on his face. He did not say anything, though, and she was grateful for that small mercy. They collected his horse from the hitching post, a sturdy roan mare that looked as trail-worn as her owner, and walked together to the livery stable. Florence's wagon was there, an old buckboard that Thomas had bought from a family heading back east. She had sold the horse team 2 weeks ago to pay off a debt at the general store, which meant she had walked the 6 miles into town that morning in the dark. "I do not have horses anymore," she admitted. "I had to sell them." Matthew nodded and simply hitched his mare to the wagon. "She can pull it. It will be slow, but we will get there." They loaded his few possessions into the back, a bedroll, saddlebags, a rifle, and a worn leather satchel that looked like it had seen better days. Florence climbed onto the bench seat and Matthew sat beside her, taking the reins. The afternoon sun beat down on them as they made their way south out of Buffalo, following the rutted path that passed for a road. For a while, neither of them spoke. Florence nibbled at her bread, trying to make it last, while Matthew kept his attention on the road. The silence was not uncomfortable exactly, but it was weighted with the strangeness of their situation. She was bringing a man she had known for less than an hour to her home, trusting him with her safety and her future. It was either incredibly brave or incredibly stupid, and she honestly could not tell which. "How did your husband die?" Matthew asked finally. "Fever. Started as a cough, turned into something worse. By the time I realized how serious it was too late to get help. He was gone within a week." She stared at the horizon, at the endless expanse of brown grass and blue sky. "We had been struggling already, barely making enough to survive. His death just made everything impossible. No children. No, we were not blessed that way." It had been a source of quiet sorrow for both of them, the empty cradle Thomas had built that first year gathering dust in the corner of the cabin. Now she was grateful. At least she only had herself to worry about. "Any idea what you want to do with the land? What crops or livestock?" Florence shook her head. "Thomas tried wheat the first 2 years. The drought killed most of it. Last year he tried to raise chickens, but something got into the coop. Coyotes or foxes, we never figured out which. This year I tried vegetables, but I did not have the strength to haul enough water from the creek and everything withered. The creek's still running, barely, but yes, it is about a 1/4 mile from the cabin." Matthew was quiet, thinking. Cattle might work. "If we can get a small herd started, they can graze on the grassland and we would not need to irrigate. Chickens too, if we build a proper coop that can keep predators out. Maybe some pigs. They will eat anything and breed fast. All of that requires money we do not have. We will start small. I have a little money saved, enough to buy maybe 2 or 3 head of cattle and some chickens. We build from there." He glanced at her. "It will not be quick and it will not be easy, but it is possible." Florence wanted to believe him, but hope had become a dangerous thing over the past few months. Every time she let herself hope, reality came crashing down harder. Still, what choice did she have? The homestead came into view as they crested a small rise. The cabin was small, just 1 room with a loft, built from rough-hewn logs that Thomas had cut himself. The roof sagged in one corner and several of the window shutters hung at odd angles. The barn was in better shape, relatively speaking, though it too needed repairs. The land stretched out around them, brown and barren, the failed garden a patch of darker earth near the cabin. Matthew pulled the wagon to a stop and sat for a moment, surveying everything with a practiced eye. Florence tried to see it through his eyes and felt embarrassment wash through her. It looked like exactly what it was. A failed homestead on the verge of being abandoned. "It has good bones," Matthew said finally. "The buildings are solid enough, they just need some attention. You do not have to lie to make me feel better. I am not lying, I have seen much worse." He climbed down from the wagon and offered her his hand again. "Come on, show me around." She took him through the cabin first, watching as he examined the roof, the walls, the fieldstone chimney Thomas had been so proud of. He poked at boards and peered into corners, nodding occasionally. Then they went to the barn, which was empty except for some old hay and the few tools she had not been forced to sell. "You have an axe," he asked, "in the barn, and a saw hammer, some nails." "Good. I will start on repairs tomorrow. Today we should focus on getting the basics sorted." "Do you have food beyond that bread and cheese?" Florence shook her head. "Some beans, a little flour, that is about it." "All right. I will see what I can hunt before dark. You have that shotgun you mentioned." She retrieved it from the cabin, along with a handful of shells. Matthew checked it over, nodded approvingly, and headed toward the creek. "I will be back before sunset. Keep the door barred while I am gone." "I can take care of myself," she said, a bit sharply. He turned back, and his expression was serious. "I know you can. But there is no shame in being cautious. You are alone out here, and that makes you vulnerable. Once I am back and settled, you will not have to worry as much." Then he was gone, moving with the easy confidence of someone who had spent a lot of time in the wilderness. Florence watched him disappear toward the creek before going back into the cabin and barring the door as he had suggested. She used the time to take stock of what she actually had. The cabin was sparsely furnished. A bed frame with a thin mattress, a rough-hewn table with 2 chairs, the empty cradle, a few pots and pans, some tin plates and cups. Her clothes filled a single trunk. Thomas's clothes were still in there too, and she had not been able to bring herself to get rid of them. The beans and flour were in a wooden crate, along with a small amount of salt and a jar of honey that was nearly empty. It was depressing, seeing her entire life reduced to such meager possessions. 5 years ago, she had lived in a real house in Cleveland with her parents and 3 siblings. She had worn nice dresses and gone to church socials and had suitors who called on Sunday afternoons. Thomas had been one of those suitors, charming and ambitious, full of dreams about the opportunities waiting out west. She had believed him, had run away with him against her parents' wishes, certain that love would be enough. Love had not been enough. Love had not kept the crops from failing or the fever from taking Thomas. Love had not filled her empty stomach or kept the roof from leaking. Love was a luxury for people who could afford it, and she was no longer one of those people. She was sitting at the table, staring at nothing, when she heard Matthew return. She unbarred the door to find him standing there with 2 rabbits, already cleaned and ready to cook. "Nice shooting," she said. "I used snares, quieter than the gun and saves ammunition." He handed them to her. "You know how to cook rabbit." "I know how to cook." She set about preparing the meal while Matthew took care of his horse, giving the mare water and what little hay remained in the barn. By the time he came back, Florence had the rabbits roasting over the fire and was using the last of her flour to make a crude bread. They ate in silence as the sun set, painting the sky in shades of orange and purple. The rabbit was tough and gamey, but it was meat and protein, and Florence savored every bite. She even allowed herself a second helping, feeling her body respond gratefully to the nourishment. "Thank you," she said when they were finished. "For the food, I mean, and for all of this." Matthew shrugged. "We are partners now, we help each other." Partners. It was a strange word for their arrangement, but she supposed it was accurate enough. She cleaned the dishes while he gathered his bedroll and headed out to the barn. "Matthew," she called, and he turned back. "Why did you really agree to this? You could find work eventually, even if the ranches are not hiring now. Why tie yourself to a failing homestead with a widow who has nothing to offer?" He was quiet for a long moment, his face shadowed in the gathering darkness. "Because I have been where you are. Maybe not exactly the same, but close enough. Someone helped me when I needed it most. I figure it is time to pay that forward." He did not wait for her response, just headed to the barn and closed the door behind him. Florence stood in the doorway of the cabin, watching fireflies begin to dance in the darkness, and wondered what kind of man Matthew Sullivan really was. The next morning, she woke to the sound of hammering. She dressed quickly and went outside to find Matthew already up on the roof, replacing rotten shingles with new ones he had apparently cut from fallen timber near the creek. "You are up early," she called. "Habit. Sun is wasting daylight." He did not stop working. "There is coffee on the fire if you want some." She had not had real coffee in weeks, and the smell of it drew her to the fire pit outside where a battered pot sat warming on the coals. She poured herself a cup and savored the bitter taste, feeling it chase away the last cobwebs of sleep. Over the next few days, they fell into a routine. Matthew worked from dawn until dusk, repairing the cabin and barn, clearing brush, fixing fences. Florence did what she could to help, though she was still regaining her strength. She cooked, mended clothes, and tended to the small tasks that kept a homestead running. Matthew proved to be as skilled as he had claimed, and she watched the property slowly transform under his attention. He was also good company, she discovered. In the evenings, after the work was done, they would sit by the fire and talk. He told her about his past, about growing up in Missouri and losing his family to cholera when he was 16. He had been drifting ever since, working various jobs, never staying anywhere too long. "Why not settle down somewhere?" she asked one night. "Find a wife, start a family." Matthew poked at the fire with a stick, sending sparks spiraling into the darkness. "Never seemed to meet the right woman, I suppose, and I was not sure I had anything to offer. Most women want stability, security. I had neither. And now I am working on it." He glanced at her, something unreadable in his expression. "What about you? Will you go back to Ohio eventually?" Florence shook her head. "My parents disowned me when I left with Thomas. I wrote to them after he died, asking if I could come home. They never responded. I have a sister who might take me in, but I would be a burden, and I have had enough of charity." "This is not charity," Matthew said firmly. "You are earning your keep, and this is your land. You have every right to be here, half yours now too by our agreement, maybe, if we make something of it." He stood, stretching. "I am heading into town tomorrow, going to see about buying some livestock with what I have saved. You want to come?" "I would rather not." The memory of selling her wedding ring was still too fresh, too raw. "But take the wagon. You will need it to bring things back." The next morning, Matthew left before dawn. Florence spent the day alone, working in what would hopefully become a new vegetable garden. Matthew had helped her stake out a plot closer to the creek, where irrigation would be easier. The work was hard and her hands blistered, but it felt good to be doing something productive. She was hauling water when she heard the wagon returning. Matthew drove it into the yard with a broad smile on his face, and in the back were 6 chickens in a makeshift crate and 2 young heifers tied to the sideboard. "You said 2 or 3 head of cattle," Florence said, staring. "Got a good deal." The seller was motivated. Matthew climbed down and started unloading. "Chickens were cheap too. Not the best laying hens, but they will do. I also got some seed for winter wheat and corn. Figured we could get a crop in before the freeze if we move fast." They spent the rest of the afternoon getting the animals settled. The chickens went into the repaired coop Matthew had built, and the heifers were turned loose in the fenced pasture. They were young, maybe a year old, but healthy looking. "They will not produce milk for a while yet," Matthew explained. "But once they are bred and have calves, we will have the start of a real herd, and we can sell the calves for income." Florence felt something unfamiliar stirring in her chest. It took her a moment to recognize it as hope. Over the following weeks, the homestead continued to improve. They planted the winter wheat and corn, working side by side in the fields. The chickens started laying eggs, not many, but enough to supplement their diet. Matthew hunted regularly, bringing back rabbits, turkey, even a deer that provided enough meat to last them for weeks after Florence smoked and preserved it. They talked more, learning about each other in the way people do when they spend most of their time together. She learned that he liked his coffee black and strong, that he had a scar on his shoulder from a horse kick, that he could not carry a tune to save his life but hummed anyway while he worked. He learned that she hated getting up early but did it anyway, that she had wanted to be a teacher before she married Thomas, that she had a sharp sense of humor that came out when she felt comfortable enough to show it. She also noticed other things. The way his shirt pulled across his shoulders when he swung the axe, the sound of his laugh, rare but genuine, the gentle way he handled the animals, the fact that he always made sure she ate first, taking whatever portion was left for himself. She tried not to notice these things. It had only been 4 months since Thomas died, and she still felt the weight of widowhood like a physical presence. But Matthew made it difficult to maintain her emotional distance. He was kind without being patronizing, helpful without being overbearing, and respectful in a way that made her feel valued rather than protected. One evening in late October, after they had brought in the last of the corn harvest, Matthew came to the cabin instead of going to the barn. Florence looked up from where she was mending a shirt, surprised. "Something wrong?" she asked. "No, well, maybe." He stood awkwardly in the doorway, his hat in his hands. "I need to talk to you about something." Fear shot through her. "You are leaving." "What? No." He stepped inside, closing the door behind him. "Florence, I am not leaving. I went into town today to sell some of the corn, get us some supplies, and I stopped by the general store." He reached into his pocket and pulled something out, holding it in his closed fist. When he opened his hand, her wedding ring lay in his palm, catching the firelight. Florence felt the air leave her lungs. "How did you?" "I bought it back from Mrs. Henderson. She still had it." He moved closer, and she could see the uncertainty in his eyes. "I know I have no right, and if this is too much or too soon, you can tell me to go to hell, but I wanted you to have it back. You should not have had to sell it, and I wondered if maybe." He trailed off, and Florence stared at the ring, emotions warring inside her. Grief for Thomas, whose memory was tied to that simple gold band. Gratitude toward Matthew, who had somehow known how much losing it had hurt her, and something else, something warm and terrifying that she was not ready to name. "I cannot take this back," she whispered. "It was Thomas's ring. It belonged to my marriage to him." "I know," Matthew's voice was gentle, "but I thought maybe if you were willing it could be more than that. It could be a promise, not from him but from me." Florence looked up at him, her heart pounding. "Matthew, what are you saying?" "I am saying that somewhere along the way, this stopped being just a business arrangement for me. I am saying I care about you, Florence, more than I should, probably, considering everything. I am saying that I want this to be real. The homestead, the partnership, all of it. I want it to be ours together." He took a shaky breath. "I want you to marry me." The words hung in the air between them, enormous and impossible. Florence felt tears prick at her eyes, her throat tight with emotion. "It has only been 4 months since Thomas died," she said. "People will talk." "Let them talk. You barely know me." "I know enough. I know you are strong and brave, and you do not quit even when you have every reason to. I know you make the best rabbit stew I have ever tasted, and you sing when you think no one is listening. I know you deserve better than barely scraping by, and I want to be the one to help you build something good. And if I say no," Matthew's expression was pained but resolute, "then I will put this ring away and never mention it again. We will go back to being partners, nothing more." "But I will not leave, Florence. This is my home too now, and I will keep my word to help make it prosper." Florence reached out and took the ring from his palm, feeling the weight of it, the memories it carried. Thomas had loved her. She did not doubt that. But Thomas was gone, and she was still here, still alive, still in need of more than just survival. She looked at Matthew, really looked at him. She saw the hope in his eyes, the fear of rejection, the genuine affection. She thought about the past weeks, about how much lighter everything had felt with him there. How she had started to look forward to their evening conversations. How her heart had begun to beat a little faster when he smiled at her. Was it love? Maybe not yet, but it could be given time. And time was something they had if she was brave enough to take it. "I need you to understand something," she said slowly. "I cared about Thomas. I mourned him, and part of me always will. If we do this, if I accept this, it does not mean I am forgetting him. I would never ask you to. And I need time. I am not ready to be married again right away. I need to be sure, and I need to do this properly." Matthew nodded. "However much time you need. We can wait until spring, until summer, until next year, whenever you are ready." Florence turned the ring over in her fingers, watching how the gold caught the light. Then, slowly, she slid it onto her right hand instead of her left. "This is a promise," she said. "A promise that I will consider it, that I am open to the possibility. But the wedding ring goes on the left hand, and I am not ready for that yet." Matthew's face broke into a smile so bright it transformed him. "That is good enough for me." He pulled her into his arms, and she let herself lean into the embrace, feeling the solid warmth of him, the steady beat of his heart against her ear. It felt different from being held by Thomas, but not worse. Just different. "New, thank you," she whispered. "For what?" "For seeing me. For helping me. For giving me back something I thought I had lost forever. It was always yours, Florence. I just made sure it found its way home." Winter came early that year, with the first snow falling in mid-November. But the cabin was warm and well stocked with firewood Matthew had cut and stacked. They had enough food to last them through to spring. A cellar full of preserved vegetables and smoked meat, sacks of grain, eggs from the chickens. The cattle had been bred and were in good health, sheltered in the barn during the worst of the storms. Florence and Matthew spent the long winter evenings by the fire, and she felt herself opening up in ways she had not expected. They played cards using a worn deck Matthew had owned for years. They read from the few books she had brought from Ohio. They talked about everything and nothing, building a foundation of friendship underneath the promise of something more. Matthew never pushed for more than she was ready to give. He stayed in the barn, even when the temperatures dropped below freezing and she worried about him out there. But he always insisted he was fine, that he had weathered worse, and she respected his determination to court her properly. By January, she had stopped wearing the ring on her right hand and moved it to her left. She did not make an announcement about it, but Matthew noticed immediately. His eyes went to her hand over breakfast, and his whole face lit up with quiet joy. "Does this mean?" He started. "It means I am ready," she said. "Whenever you are." They were married on a cold February morning in Buffalo, with the preacher and 2 witnesses from the general store. Florence wore her best dress, which was not saying much, but Matthew looked at her like she was wearing silk and diamonds. When he slid the ring onto her finger officially, his hands trembled slightly, and she realized he had been just as nervous as she was. The ride back to the homestead felt different somehow. It was their homestead now, not just hers or just theirs by arrangement, but genuinely belonging to both of them. That night, Matthew finally moved his belongings from the barn into the cabin, and Florence made room for him in every sense of the word. Their wedding night was tentative and gentle, both of them nervous in different ways. But it was also sweet, full of whispered words and soft touches, and when Florence fell asleep in Matthew's arms, she felt a peace she had not experienced in a very long time. Spring brought new beginnings. The wheat they had planted began to sprout, a sea of green spreading across the fields. The heifers gave birth to healthy calves, a bull and a heifer, starting their herd's growth. Florence discovered she was pregnant in April, and Matthew's joy was so complete and unrestrained that it made her laugh through happy tears. "A baby," he kept saying, as if he could not quite believe it. "We are having a baby. You do not have to sound so shocked. That is generally what happens when married people share a bed." He grinned and swept her into a careful embrace. "I know, I never thought I would get to have this. A home, a wife, a child on the way. It feels like a dream." "Well, it is real. And you better get used to it, because this baby is going to need a father who can keep his feet on the ground." The pregnancy progressed smoothly through the summer. They hired a man from town to help with the harvest, paying him with a portion of the wheat crop. The yield was good, better than Florence had dared hope, and they sold most of it for a decent profit. For the first time since Thomas died, she had money in her pocket and food in her pantry, and the future looked bright instead of bleak. In early November, their son was born. The labor was long and difficult, with only Matthew and the midwife from town in attendance, but when Florence finally held her baby boy in her arms, every moment of pain was forgotten. "What should we name him?" Matthew asked, gazing down at his son with wonder. Florence thought for a moment, looking at this new life they had created together. James Matthew Sullivan." "James." Matthew tested the name, then nodded. "It is perfect. He is perfect." He leaned down and kissed Florence's forehead. "You are perfect." "I am exhausted and sweaty and probably look terrible." "You look beautiful. You are always beautiful." And the way he looked at her, she almost believed him. The years that followed were not without challenges. There were hard winters and dry summers, sick animals and failed crops. Matthew broke his arm in a fall from the barn roof when James was 2, and Florence nearly lost the baby she was carrying with their second child due to complications. But they weathered every storm together, supporting each other through the difficult times and celebrating the good ones. Their daughter Ruth was born in the spring of 1879, healthy and loud, and opinionated from the moment she entered the world. James adored his baby sister, and Florence loved watching Matthew with both children. He was patient and playful, the kind of father who got down on the floor to play with blocks and never complained about sticky hands on his clothes. The homestead prospered under their joint management. The cattle herd grew to over 30 head. They added pigs and more chickens, and Matthew built a proper smokehouse for preserving meat. Florence started a larger garden and sold vegetables in town during the summer months. They were not rich by any means, but they were comfortable, and that was more than Florence had ever dared dream during those dark days after Thomas died. One evening in the summer of 1881, Florence stood in the doorway of their cabin, watching Matthew teach James how to throw a rope while Ruth toddled around their feet. The sun was setting, painting everything in shades of gold, and she felt a contentment so deep it almost hurt. Matthew looked up and caught her watching, and the smile he gave her was full of love and understanding. He handed the rope to James and walked over, pulling her into his arms. "What are you thinking about?" he asked. "How far we have come. How different things are now from that day I met you in town." "You mean the day you were sitting on the walkway, half-starved and desperate?" "That is exactly what I mean." She touched the ring on her finger, the simple gold band that had been traded for bread, bought back and placed on her finger again. "I never thanked you properly, you know, for buying this back, for seeing what it meant to me. You did not need to thank me, I wanted you to have it. I know. But I also know it was not really about the ring, was it? It was about giving me back hope, about showing me that things could get better." Matthew cupped her face in his hands, his thumbs gentle on her cheeks. "I fell in love with you that first day, sitting there on that walkway, trying so hard to be strong even though you were breaking. I saw who you really were, Florence, and I knew I would do anything to make you smile again. You did more than make me smile. You gave me a life worth living." We gave each other that. This was never just me saving you. You saved me too in all the ways that matter. She kissed him then, long and sweet, tasting sunlight and summer and the promise of all their tomorrows. James made a disgusted noise at his parents kissing, and Ruth giggled, and Matthew pulled back with a laugh. "Our audience disapproves," he said. "They will understand when they are older." They walked back to the children together, hand in hand, and Florence felt the ring warm against her skin. It was just a simple piece of gold, no diamonds or engravings, but it represented everything that mattered. Love, yes, but also resilience. The ability to start over. The courage to let go of the past and embrace the future. That night, after the children were asleep, Matthew and Florence sat by the fire as they had done countless times before. The conversation drifted to their plans for the coming year, to dreams of expanding the herd, maybe building an addition onto the cabin now that their family was growing. "Do you ever regret it?" Florence asked suddenly. Taking a chance on a failing homestead and a desperate widow. Matthew was quiet for a moment, considering the question seriously. "Not for a single second, do you? Regret trusting a stranger who offered you a crazy business arrangement? Never." And she meant it with her whole heart. The next few years brought more changes. James started school in town, riding there each morning on his pony. Ruth grew from a toddler into a bright, curious child who followed her father everywhere. Florence had another baby in 1883, a boy they named Thomas, in honor of her first husband. Matthew had suggested the name, saying that the man deserved to be remembered for bringing Florence west, for being part of her story. It was a gesture that showed how secure Matthew was in their love, how he did not see Thomas as a threat or a rival, but simply as part of Florence's past that deserved acknowledgement. She loved him even more for that understanding. By 1885, the Sullivan homestead was one of the more prosperous farms in the Buffalo area. They had over 50 head of cattle, a thriving pig operation, and sold eggs and vegetables regularly. Matthew had been elected to the local farming cooperative, and Florence had started teaching reading lessons to children whose families lived too far from town for regular schooling. Their children were healthy and happy. James, now 8, was already showing skill with animals and talked about being a rancher like his father. Ruth, at 6, was whip smart and had announced her intention to be a doctor, despite everyone telling her girls could not do such things. Thomas was 2 and into everything, a bundle of energy that kept them all on their toes. On their 7th wedding anniversary, Matthew surprised Florence with a new ring. It was delicate, with a small diamond set in the band, nothing extravagant but beautiful. "I wanted you to have something more," he explained as he slid it onto her finger alongside the original band. "Something that represents the life we built together." Florence looked at the 2 rings on her finger, the old and the new, and felt tears well up. "Matthew Sullivan, you are the best man I have ever known." Even better than the first husband. She heard the teasing in his tone, but she answered seriously. "Thomas was a good man, and I did care for him. But you, Matthew, you are my partner in every sense. My best friend, my lover, the father of my children, the keeper of my heart. You are everything." He pulled her close, and she felt the solid strength of him, the warmth she had come to depend on. "You are everything to me too, Florence. Everything that matters." That night they lay in bed together, the window open to let in the cool spring air. Matthew's arm was around her, her head on his chest, listening to the steady rhythm of his heart. "Tell me the story again," he said softly. "About the day we met." Florence smiled against his chest. "You know the story. I like hearing you tell it." So she did, recounting that desperate day when she had been at her lowest point, selling her wedding ring for bread because survival mattered more than sentiment. She told him about sitting on the walkway, dizzy with hunger and hopelessness. About how he had appeared like an answer to a prayer she had not even thought to pray. "I was so suspicious of you," she admitted. "I thought you must want something improper, or that you were crazy, or both." Matthew chuckled. "You were not entirely wrong to be suspicious. It was an unusual offer. It was the best offer anyone ever made me." She tilted her head to look up at him. "You saw me at my absolute worst, at my most desperate and vulnerable, and you offered me partnership instead of pity. You gave me back my dignity along with my ring." "The ring was important," Matthew said. "When I saw that pale line on your finger, when I realized what you had done, I knew I had to get it back for you. Not because I wanted you to keep wearing it as Thomas's widow, but because I wanted to be the one to put it back on your finger as my wife. You were planning that far ahead. Even then, maybe not consciously. But I knew, Florence. From that first moment, I knew you were special. I knew I wanted to build a life with you." Florence felt a warmth spread through her chest, the same feeling she got whenever Matthew said something particularly romantic. Even after 7 years of marriage, he could still make her heart flutter. "I love you," she whispered. "I love you so much it scares me sometimes." "Why does it scare you?" "Because I know how quickly it can all be taken away. I lost Thomas so suddenly. What if I lost you too?" Matthew tightened his arm around her. "You will not lose me. I am not going anywhere." "You cannot promise that. Life is unpredictable." "Then I promise this. However much time we have, whether it is 50 more years or 50 more days, I will spend every moment loving you with everything I have. And when I am gone, whenever that is, you will know without a single doubt that you were the best thing that ever happened to me." Florence felt tears slip down her cheeks, but they were not sad tears. They were tears of gratitude, of overwhelming love, of recognition that she had been given a second chance at happiness, and she had seized it with both hands. The years continued to pass, bringing with them the normal joys and sorrows of life. There were more children. Florence gave birth to twin girls in 1887, Clara and Catherine, filling the cabin with even more noise and laughter. There were losses, too. They lost cattle to a harsh winter in 1888, and Florence's sister back in Ohio died, a reconciliation letter arriving too late to mend their estrangement. But through it all, Matthew and Florence remained steady partners. They worked together, raised their children together, built their life together brick by brick and day by day. The homestead expanded. They eventually bought the adjoining 80 acres from a family moving to California, doubling their land. James grew into a strong young man who did indeed become a rancher, taking over more and more of the cattle operation as Matthew's back began to ache from years of hard labor. Ruth, true to her childhood declaration, went east to study medicine, one of the first women admitted to a medical college. Thomas showed an aptitude for mechanics and spent his time tinkering with machinery, talking about how engines and automobiles were the future. The twins were still young, but already showing distinct personalities, Clara quiet and bookish, Catherine bold and adventurous. In 1895, on a warm summer evening, Matthew and Florence sat on the porch they had added to the cabin years earlier. Their hair was now streaked with gray, their hands weathered from decades of work, but they sat close together as always, fingers intertwined. "Do you remember what you said to me that first day?" Matthew asked. "When I offered to work your land, Florence thought back nearly 20 years. I probably said something sarcastic. I was not in a trusting mood. You said you had a shotgun and knew how to use it. She laughed. I did say that. I was trying to sound tough. You were tough. You still are. He lifted her hand to his lips, kissing her knuckles. But you were also scared and alone and trying so hard not to let it show. And you saw through me immediately. I saw you. The real you, underneath all the fear and pride. I saw a woman worth fighting for. Florence leaned her head on his shoulder, looking out at the land they had built together. The fields were green with crops. The cattle grazed peacefully in the distance. The sound of their children and grandchildren drifted from inside the house where dinner was being prepared. We did good, did we not? She said. We took something broken and made it whole. We did better than good. We made something beautiful. She touched the rings on her finger, the original simple band and the one with the small diamond. They were worn now, scratched and dented from years of wear, but they had never left her finger since the day Matthew placed them there. I used to think love was about grand gestures, she said quietly. About romance and passion and sweeping declarations. Thomas courted me with poetry and flowers, and I thought that was what love looked like. And now I know love is about showing up. It is about working side by side in the fields. It is about staying up all night with a sick child. It is about buying back a wedding ring because you know what it means to someone. It is about choosing each other every single day, even when it is hard. Matthew turned to face her, his hand cupping her cheek. Despite the years, despite the gray hair and the wrinkles, when he looked at her, his eyes still held the same warmth they had that first day in Buffalo. I choose you, he said. I chose you then, I choose you now. I will choose you every day for the rest of my life. I choose you too, always. They sat together as the sun set, painting the Wyoming sky in brilliant shades of orange and pink. Inside the house, their family waited, the fruit of their love and labor. But for this moment, it was just the two of them. Two people who had found each other in the darkest of times and built a life filled with light. Florence thought about the woman she had been, starving and desperate, trading her wedding ring for bread. She thought about the man who had appeared out of nowhere with an impossible offer and an open heart. She thought about every moment between then and now, every challenge overcome, every joy celebrated, every ordinary day that had somehow added up to an extraordinary life. The ring on her finger caught the fading light, glinting softly. It had traveled a strange journey from Thomas's hand to hers, to the baker's shop, to Matthew's pocket, and finally back to her finger where it belonged. But it was more than just a circle of gold. It was a symbol of resilience, of second chances, of the possibility that even in our darkest moments hope could find us. Matthew, she said softly. Yes, love, thank you for everything, for seeing me, for saving me, for loving me. You saved yourself, Florence. You were surviving long before I came along. I just gave you a reason to start living again. We gave that to each other. He pulled her closer, and they sat together in the gathering darkness, two souls who had found their home in each other. The stars began to appear overhead, the same stars that had witnessed their first meeting, their first kiss, their wedding, the births of their children, every significant moment of their shared life. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, new joys, new reasons to keep choosing each other. But tonight, they had this. The peace of knowing they were exactly where they were meant to be, with exactly who they were meant to be with. Inside the house, Ruth called out that dinner was ready. Matthew stood and offered Florence his hand, just as he had done so many times before. She took it, letting him pull her to her feet, and together they walked toward the warmth and light of their home. The door closed behind them, but their love remained, solid and enduring as the land beneath their feet, as constant as the Wyoming sky above their heads, as precious as the ring that had been traded for bread and bought back with love. And if someone had asked Florence in that moment if she had any regrets about the path her life had taken, she would have answered without hesitation, not a single one. Every hardship, every moment of despair, every impossible choice had led her here to this life, to this man, to this beautiful, hard-won happiness. The ring on her finger was not just a reminder of where she had been, but a promise of where she was going. And as long as Matthew was by her side, she knew the future would be bright. Their story was not one of fairy tale romance or love at first sight. It was better than that. It was a story of two broken people who found each other and chose to build something whole. It was a story of partnership and perseverance, of love earned through daily acts of kindness and commitment. It was, simply put, a story of real love, the kind that endures.